Liberals' spending is out of control. They're completely out of touch with and don't have a clue about how the vast majority of people in Canada live. Unlike their elite friends who they so fondly dole out tax dollars to in scandal after scandal, and most people in this country, they work hard for what little money they have. The government is spending billions upon billions of hard-earned taxpayer dollars on frivolous vanity projects, on initiatives that no one other than their seatmate at the World Economic Forum really care about. All while the government is raising payroll taxes, tripling the carbon tax, and implementing inflationary policies that weaken the dollar or price essential goods out of reach. The callousness on display, the late attitude of cancel your Disney Plus subscription and you'll save money coming from the people who aren't hurting, who don't struggle to keep food on their tables or heat their homes, has to stop. Speaker, after seeing another load of spending and learning about Canada's over $1 trillion national debt, one constituent of mine, Chris, wrote in to say, and I quote, "I'd like to see them in our shoes, that is the middle class or low income households, with our wages, with high inflation for food, gas, heating, raising Bank of Canada interest rates, soon to be the tripling of the carbon tax, pay our bills, our mortgage, our debts, and see if the budget balances itself. I don't need a handout of my own taxpayer dollars. I need a government that will fix the real issue behind Canada's problems." End quote. My message to this resident of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex and to all Canadians who share this view is that if you want to see change, you need to vote Conservative in the next election. Our leader, the member for Carleton, knows the same simple fact nearly everyone but our Prime Minister understands. Budgets don't balance themselves. And more spending like what was announced in this fall economic statement only adds inflationary fuel to the fire. But this isn't the only feedback that I've received about waste and misplaced priorities. Speaker, recently a 12-year-old wrote me with a message that has more common sense in it than this government has displayed in years. And this is from Everett. Everett says, and I quote, "I've been thinking about why the Prime Minister wants to further tax our hardworking farmers and their families. This tax will dramatically increase the cost of food to the consumer. Here's what I would say to Parliament, to the politicians. Speaker, if the federal government continues to enforce laws that control our farmers, there will be widespread criticism to the Liberal government, which has already spent billions of wasted tax dollars. Canadians have already faced difficulties in the beginning of the decade. Forcing our farmers to pay a tax on livestock methane will only lead to farmers who can barely get enough money to pay the ever-increasing carbon tax. It will lead to more bankruptcies in the country. Canadians are fed up. They had already said it in the beginning of 2022. The government silenced them. With inflation, it will make it harder for Canadians to get past this winter. Canadians will be starving, and this government will have caused another famine and caused people to starve. When will the federal government end the mandates against Canadian farmers?" End quote. Well said, Everett. Thank you for sending that in. I agree. Speaker, it's true, the government can't see the forest through the trees, which is funny because they committed to planting so many of them. I think it was 2 million trees and they've planted 0. But wait, that's another Liberal commitment that has flown by the wayside, isn't it? Just like their promises for accountability and transparency. It's no wonder that they have to resort to using Conservative ideas to give their fall economic statement any substance. What ideas could those be? Well, investing in Canadian-made green, clean technology. That's something we on this side of the House and Conservatives have been calling for years. In fact, making investments in and growing Canadian capacity to be a global leader in clean green tech is exactly what we put forward in our last 2 platforms. An idea, I should add, that creates jobs and helps the environment that was opposed by the Liberals before. After learning their current war against the Canadian energy sector had cost 170,000 Canadian workers' jobs, without a credible plan to back up their big assumptions and magical thinking, it's about time they saw the light. We should also note that the first figure is on top of 180,000 energy jobs that were already destroyed under this Liberal government. That's 350,000 jobs and counting, killed to satisfy the Liberal government's imagination, Mr. Speaker. While these Canadians look for work, the government buys the oil and gas we need from dictators instead. Canadians need more common sense initiatives. As should be obvious, it's Conservatives who will give them that. It's Conservatives who will support our domestic resource industries and make positive changes that benefit all, even if the government tries to hide their mistakes and take credit for our ideas. Speaker, did you know that the average tax income of a millennial in Canada is under $50,000? Did you know the average Canadian family pays $39,000 in taxes? For Canadians aged 25 to 40, that means it's nearly impossible to get ahead. It means they won't be able to afford a home until retirement age, and that's if they get to retire. It means that every dollar recklessly wasted by this government to grow inflation only puts them further behind. Tripling the carbon tax and increasing payroll taxes so that the government can keep spending taxes does not give them hope. This situation is surprisingly similar to what Canadian seniors currently face. They sacrificed to save their money. After years of working hard, they gave it all to grow our nation, to make it successful and a great place to live. Only many are telling me that they are feeling left behind and abandoned, forgotten by a government that no longer sees them as useful. A Liberal regime that would rather offer them death instead of sufficient medical or mental health care. They see no hope coming from spending announcements. They only see their bills piling up, groceries getting more expensive and becoming unaffordable, and a winter ahead of them with not enough money to keep the heat on. This is all thanks to the Liberal government's spending and mismanagement of Canada's finances. From our millennials to our seniors, Canadians are saddened to see this once prosperous, thriving country with an incredible reputation on the global stage become what it's become today under this current government. A tax and spend nation that is driving people into poverty and is quickly becoming the laughingstock of the world. Speaker, I can see from the faces of those opposite that they don't believe me, but they should pay attention to this next bit of testimony. One of my seniors from Wallaceburg writes, and I quote, "I'm on ODSP and my check has been cut by $500. It's winter right now and I need that because of the prices of heating oil. It's $1,800 to fill my tank, and that is what I now get from ODSP." End quote. This Canadian has nothing to live on and no other options. So how about this heartbreaking story from another young mother? She says, "Today," and I quote, "Today I spent the whole day consoling two brothers, aged 1 and 3, sick with a bad virus. If I could give them Tylenol or Advil, I would have had a bad day, but they would have survived. Instead, my two very active boys have cried and moaned, thrown up and begged to be carried. They have slept in my arms and have been miserable all day." End quote. Instead of acting quickly to see that Canadian children had the medicine they need, this government waited. Instead of working to make certain Canada never faces a similar shortage, they announced boutique spending policies that help no one. This economic statement doesn't address the cost of living crisis that this costly NDP Liberal coalition government has created. Their reckless spending and mounting national debt is simply not fair to future generations. I've also been hearing from young people that with inflation and the cost of housing, they'll be living in their parents' basement until at least the age of 30, and that they've given up on their dream of owning a home for their family to live in. To afford food, to be warm this winter, and to give hope to the next generation of Canadians, Conservatives will always stand strong against the Liberal government's reckless spending and fight for common sense policies. Finally, here are some questions from average Canadians that no one has been able to answer yet, and I quote, Where's the carbon tax going? Who gets it? What is it being spent on? No one believes that it's coming back to them like the Liberals claim. Since the inception of the carbon tax, many have been asking, how does paying money to the government stop the global temperature from rising? How does money going from their bank account to a slush fund for the Prime Minister's self-glorification clean up the atmosphere, especially when China is the world's biggest polluter by far? How does paying a tax stabilize the weather when the sun is the biggest influencer of the Earth's climate? How does me handing money over to the least transparent, least democratic, most expensive government in our nation's history stop a hurricane from hitting the West Coast or the East Coast? It's time to scrap the carbon tax. Speaker, Liberal spending is out of control, and for these reasons outlined, I cannot support this economic statement. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's this member or members in general from the Conservative Party, once again, they demonstrate just how much they are out of touch with the reality in terms of what this fiscal update budget is all about and the legislation that the member is debating. When the member talks about seniors, never before in the history of this government have we seen, or in the last 50 years or so, where we have seen a government commit so much towards seniors. Whether it's literally lifting tens of thousands out of poverty, to the increase of 10% for those age 75 and over, which was an election commitment that was given by this government, not to mention the one-time payments that have been made over the years. And for those seniors, everyone's getting this GST credit doubling over the next 6 months. There's a litany of things within this budget document. And the member continues to want to take the Conservative spin lines as to her opposition. My question to the member is, has she really gone through the fall economic statement? And if so, how could she possibly say what she has said on the record today?
Honourable Member for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleague for his question. Well, Speaker, the government's lack of monetary policy is just letting too many Canadians fall through the cracks, especially our seniors. And I'm going to read to you an example from Martin, who sent me this letter. He says he and his wife are pensioners. They live below the poverty line. At ages 73 and 68, they still work 2 to 3 days a week to make ends meet. He sent me a copy of his monthly budget and noted that after paying their bills, they have no choice. They have to choose between having to buy clothing, put gas in their car, or they will have to save up to have some entertainment. He says, quote, "We helped get this country to where we are today now. Even at our age, retirement is not our future," end quote. So, Speaker, where is the help for Canadian seniors?
Question et commentaire. Questions and comments.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened to my colleague's speech with interest, and obviously the question of energy came up a number of times. So I would read a statistic which says that since the Paris Agreement in 2015, 5 major Canadian banks have invested billions in fossil fuels, but the situation isn't changing. Should we act when it comes to banks? And I have a concern, and I know that the Conservatives share this concern. How can we make our economy greener and make sure that energy jobs be sustainable, and that we also look at innovation in the sector? Should we be investing more in innovation and in greening our economy? And how do we make the economy more resilient in the prairie provinces? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex.
I thank my colleague for his question, but Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about how this government is so out of touch with Canadians and how life is getting so much more expensive for Canadians. And one of my constituents says, I'm sure you're aware, everything's going up. Gas is up in where they live. It's up to $1.83 a litre. Groceries are skyrocketed. Housing prices are becoming impossible. And with the government's carbon tax increase, it's only going to get worse. People have suffered enough hardship over these last 2 years with the pandemic. We need some kind of reprieve. People like that, like me, who live in rural areas, do not have access to public transit. It's unfair of the Prime Minister to continually punish us for something that is completely beyond our control. I also need to heat my home during the winter months. Heat is a necessity, not a luxury. I am respectfully requesting, please bring this to the attention of the House of Commons and plead with the Liberal government to help us. This is unsustainable and this is wrong, end quote. And I agree here with my constituent, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Esquimalt, Saanich-Sooke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, I listened with interest to the honourable member's speech expressing concern about seniors, but I think she wants us to forget it was the Conservative Party who tried to raise the age of retirement under the Harper government, and that had to be reversed. That people wouldn't be collecting OAS until 67 if the Conservatives had their way. And on the other side, she talks about young people trying to get a start. And in this fall economic supplement, one of the main reasons I'm supporting it is because it takes away interest on student loans, which will go a great way to helping people get a start in life.
The honourable member for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have another senior who emailed me for my riding, and he has a real concern this winter because of the cost of living and what it's going to cost to heat his home. And he says he just received his oil delivery yesterday for 415.4 litres of furnace oil at a cost of $885.82. He says, how can somebody please explain to me how I'm paying more for furnace oil than for the price of diesel? And so he's attached his receipt here, Mr. Speaker. And of course, you know, it's a very real issue for seniors here. They're wondering how they're going to pay their bills and heat their homes this winter, and tripling of the carbon tax isn't going to help. We need to axe the tax.